A key focus of our government's broad review of the criminal justice system is to ensure that we protect the safety of Canadians, especially our most vulnerable. Bill C-84 does just that. It also ensures that we are doing everything we can to prevent violence and cruelty towards animals. The legislation I just tabled reflects significant consultation with child and animal protection groups, as well as agricultural stakeholders. It responds to calls from Canadians that we close critical gaps in the criminal law relating to bestiality, and that we also begin to substantively address the issue of animal fighting. And on this note, I would like to thank my colleagues and all parliamentarians for their commitment to this important matter, and I would especially like to acknowledge my colleague Nathaniel Erskine-Smith for his commitment and for his previous private member's bill and leadership in this regard. Thanks, Nate. Bill C-84 has two main points. The first closes the gap in our criminal law identified by the Supreme Court of Canada in their 2016 decision R and DLW. In that decision, the court ruled that the existing definition of bestiality only covers penetrative acts. In direct response to that decision, Bill C-84 will add a definition of bestiality provisions in the criminal code to make it clear that the offense prohibits any contact for a sexual purpose between a person and an animal. Research shows a well-established link between bestiality and child sex abuse, as well as other forms of violence. By ensuring that all forms of bestiality are protected, the criminal justice system will better protect animals from cruelty and violence, as well as our most vulnerable from being exposed to terrible acts. Let me be clear, this amendment has no application to legitimate animal husbandry or veterinary practices. The second part of C-84 marks an important step in providing comprehensive protections for all animals. The legislation will amend our animal cruelty offenses to prohibit a broader range of activities associated with animal fighting, such as promoting, arranging, and profiting off animal fighting, as well as breeding, training, or transporting an animal to fight. The bill also expands provisions to prohibit the keeping of an arena for the purposes of animal fighting. The changes brought forth today will improve the ability to prosecute criminals, track animal fighting cases, and protect public safety. And again, I want to be clear that the activities included in Bill C-84 do not apply to legitimate breeding, training, or use of a dog for protection or hunting. For many Canadians, animals are an important extension of our families and of our communities. Our laws need to reflect these values and protect animals and provide protection to them that they require from such senseless acts of violence. These crimes have no place in our society. By tabling this legislation, our government is demonstrating our unequivocal commitment to protecting children and other vulnerable individuals, protecting animals from abuse and violence, and ensuring that our criminal law remains clear and current. Thank you. Any questions?
Pushing for this for years. Why now and not, shortly after the Supreme Court decision? And also, any indication about how big either the dogfighting issue or this animal bestiality issue are here in Canada?
Well, I actually want to start by recognizing the advocacy of the humane societies, of many advocates across the country who have wanted to ensure we do everything we can to protect animals, and not only the advocates across the country, but also my colleagues, parliamentarians on all sides of the House who have advocated for this change. I am very aware that the decision happened 2 years ago. At that time, recognized that there was a need and a call from the court to change to put a definition of bestiality into the criminal code. It took some time, and we engaged in fairly extensive consultations, and while there are some issues around animal cruelty and the provisions in the criminal code that we're not addressing here, some that are a little bit more controversial and require more discussion, providing a definition of bestiality and expanding the application of animal fighting to all animals and arenas is something that was uncontroversial and something that organizations from the humane societies to veterinarians to agricultural advocates have all agreed to. So we're really pleased to be able to put forward these two changes.
Minister, I'm not sure I understand the links being made between the redefinition of bestiality and how it protects specifically children. I don't see the link there.
There have been many recent studies, actually studies that came as a result of the Supreme Court of Canada decision that have made a definite link to activities with respect to bestiality and the presence of children in terms of child pornography and other despicable acts. There's a link from individuals and this doesn't necessarily reflect or specific to bestiality, but individuals that have been seen as being cruel to animals when they're younger grow up to have and engage in activities that are despicable or sexual violence in terms of kids or other individuals. So there's links that have been drawn.
There's not something directly targeted to children in this. What you're saying is that by broadening the definition, we will catch more people who are potentially abusing children as well.
Well, it's and what came out of the Supreme Court decision back in 2016 was, that was a horrible situation, a horrible fact pattern. What it identified was there was a gap in the law in terms of not having a definition through case law of bestiality that was only included penetrative acts, that there is a broader range of acts that can occur with respect to an animal that would have potentially, likely made a difference in that particular case, in that particular fact situation, which involved children.
And how is your bill different from the private members' bill that was actually defeated last June?
Well, there's similarities in the bill. Nathaniel, our colleague, strong advocate, as I said, recognized the need to change or to put a definition of bestiality into the criminal code, also address the issues that we're addressing with respect to animal fighting. The private members bill 246 addressed a broader range of issues that from looking at shark finning to animal furs and the sale of animal furs to a number of other issues, but it crossed over a number of different ministers and acts, not necessarily just the criminal code. Not to say that the issues that were identified in that private members bill or in other private members bills that have come forward aren't important. We just need to take some additional time to make sure that we're answering those questions based on what we hear and the feedback that we hear.
About animal fights, I don't think you've answered the question. How big a phenomenon is that?
Oh. Well, in terms of, I think your question was around the prevalence of bestiality as well and offense and animal fighting.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily have specific data around the prevalence of bestiality and charges around that. It's not a common occurrence. In terms of animal fighting, there have been specific cases that we can refer to in the past, but the prevalency of animal fighting, I'm not exactly clear on how prevalent it is. It does exist, and where it exists, we want to make sure that we have laws in place to prevent it.
Minister, can I ask you on another? I just want to try to hear someone in French, maybe.
Sure, my amazing parliamentary secretary.
Oui, allez-y, madame. Oui.
Ça ajoute une protection sur la bestialité aujourd'hui, ce que vous proposez.
Oui, donc effectivement, il y a deux catégories. Donc, on va ajouter une définition pour la bestialité. Donc, c'est pas juste la pénétration, c'est un acte sexuel pour un acte avec un objectif sexuel avec un animal. Donc, c'est la première partie. L'autre partie, c'est d'ajouter une plus large définition pour le combat des animaux. Donc, c'est pas juste le combat qu'on lutte contre, c'est aussi les autres aspects, soit la reproduction d'un animal pour un combat. Le fait de promouvoir un combat, le fait de tirer un profit d'un combat. Donc, effectivement, avec un élargissement de cet aspect, on va assister ou améliorer le combat contre le combat des animaux. Donc, ça, c'est les deux parties.